My name is Emma. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in social psychology at UT Austin, and I have a lot of fun talking to ChatGPT. I talk to it about a lot of things, so I've asked for support while navigating where to head after completing my PhD, to which GPT said, "It sounds like I've reached a pivotal moment in my career, so it's understandable I'm feeling overwhelmed." I also ask for support when my parents tell me that they're selling the house that we've lived in for 20 years, to which Chat said, "It sounds like I'm navigating a challenging phase, and it's natural to feel sad." I also talked to ChatGPT about feeling overwhelmed with school, to which it told me, "It sounds like I'm in a tough situation. It's understandable to be feeling frustrated." And I turned to GPT to express my frustrations about my boyfriend finishing the last of the sugar cookies in our pantry after an exam, to which it said, "It sounds like I'm in a challenging position. And importantly, my feelings are valid." So on the surface, these are pretty solid responses. They seem empathetic enough to my specific situation, except when we take a closer look, the underlying structure of these responses is extremely similar. First, the model restates what I said, it validates my feelings, and then it adds in an empowering statement. So regardless of the context of our conversation, it's essentially giving me the same response every time. And this is particularly striking because, as we all know, people reliably rate AI-generated empathy as more empathetic than human-written empathy. So we've seen this finding replicated several times, both across LLMs and a wide range of contexts. And we also replicated this finding as part of the work I'm so excited to talk to you all about today. But I want to circle back to earlier, where I showed some examples of empathic responses ChatGPT generated for me. So each color text here is associated with a type of empathic behavior, like validation or empowerment. And the important takeaway here is that AI-generated empathy appears to be generally homogeneous. It's multifaceted in that there are multiple support strategies typically present, but those strategies appear to manifest in a similar sort of rhythm. And we know that LLMs are trained on human data, so it makes sense that their supportive responses follow a flow that we're familiar with and commonly use, but there hasn't really been a comprehensive study or theory of these sorts of empathic strategies. So this leads me to introduce a taxonomy of empathic language strategies, or tactics, that we created with the goal of defining distinct categories that are identifiable in text with high reliability. So after an initial cross-disciplinary literature review, we compiled a list of tactics like validation and empowerment, and then we collected a set of Reddit posts that we had both psychologists and AI respond to. And then we did an iterative coding process where we coded each sentence, just like in the examples I showed you at the beginning, and we used this process to refine our codebook for the various tactics. So if there was a sentence that didn't really fit into an existing category, we would make a new one through another round of lit review. And then after multiple rounds of this process, we identified 10 different empathic language tactics, including things like emotional expression, reappraisal, paraphrasing, and 3 independent raters were able to agree with an average alpha of about 0.78 across all the categories on the sentence level. So now I want to zoom out again. I'm going to show you 3 responses written by GPT Turbo to 3 completely different posts, and these responses have been labeled on the sentence level for empathic tactics. I just want you to focus on the colors, each of which represents a different empathic tactic. Notice how similar the patterns are here. Each grouping of tactics occurs in a similar spot in all of the responses. When we actually look at the distribution of tactics across responses, we can see some interesting patterns. So in this figure, we're considering unique tactics. That is, how many responses contained at least one of each tactic type. So advice, paraphrasing, offering validation, and for GPT and Quen, offering information appear in at least 90% of the responses in our data. In fact, paraphrasing occurs in almost 100% of all of our LLM responses here. By contrast, the human-written responses show far less exaggerated of a pattern, using a lot more strategies like questioning, self-disclosure, or offering assistance than any of the models. But this is understandable, right? People might feel like it's strange or deceptive if an LLM self-discloses any personal experiences. But not only do LLMs use the same relatively homogeneous set of tactics, they also do so in a relatively fixed manner. So because we annotated tactics within responses by identifying parts of sentences that reflected a tactic, like this, we have an ordered sequence of tactic codes for each response, kind of like this. So the analysis that I'm about to go over, they kind of reflect our consideration of responses as sequences of tactics, like the box on the right, rather than raw text, which is the box on the left. And I want to mention that we also collapsed repeating tactics, like this paraphrasing here, into one instance for the purposes of our analyses. So we use regular expressions, or regexes, to search for, define, and describe our templates because they offer a formal way of capturing repeating patterns by treating each tactic as an atomic character that can be matched in text. So to kind of help wrap your head around that, I'll give you a crash course into regexes, starting with an example. So take these responses from GPT that we looked at earlier. What really stands out here is this repeating chunk of orange and magenta in the middle of all the responses. So this is a pattern of advice, justified by some information, followed by more advice, justified by more information, something like, you should go outside, the sun is good for you. So regex is particularly useful here because while in these examples we see a relatively similar pattern of advice and information, other responses had slight differences. For example, sometimes we had responses where information would come before advice. So the sun is good for you, you should go outside. And sometimes that was it, just one instance of advice and information, but in others, like the ones from GPT that I just showed you, we could see this advice and information cycle several times in several forms. So the regular expression, AI in brackets, plus, captures any repeating combination of advice and information that appears at least once in a response and would match sequences like all of those to the left and more. And we can apply this idea to any grouping of tactics. With that, we created templates as regular expressions to capture the discourse structure of empathic responses written by LLMs and humans. We find that the vast majority of LLM responses can be described by this template. And you're going to see some formal regular expression notation on the very left, and then what tactics they're associated with on the right of it as I walk you through. But it's this template. Starting with an optional emotional expression, it's that question mark, means optional, alternating paraphrasing and validation, interjecting with an optional emotional expression or statement of empowerment, and then alternating giving advice, information, and paraphrasing. So this template matches between 88 and 92% of LLM responses and 61% of human responses in our data set. So this is how many responses that contained portions that were matched by this regular expression. And within those matched responses, this 88% of LLM responses and this 61% of human responses, this template captures 50 to 60% of those 88 to 92 responses, and then 46% of the 61% of human responses. So we also ran a second study looking at about 6 times more responses than this first one, and found that these templates replicate. In our study 2, we find that this same template written up here that was just on the previous slide as well, matches 62 to 88% of our LLM responses and only 12% of our human responses. So this low across response coverage also suggests that people are very diverse in the way that they express empathy, since their responses don't really fit into this template, unlike LLMs. But within these matched responses, the pattern covers or explains about 36 to 55% of those LLM responses and 45% of those human responses. So it's important to mention that in this study, we had a more naturalistic set of human responses. So this was Reddit comments with at least 100 words in response to our post stimuli. In contrast, our first study, which was on the previous slide, we specifically recruited humans with a psychology background. So maybe they could have been trained on what makes a good empathetic response compared to our Redditors. So looping back to this phenomenon of people perceiving LLM-generated support as more empathic than that of humans, I think our findings here contribute to the discussion of why this might be. Our results suggest that LLMs have learned and consistently deploy a well-liked template for expressing empathy, and that humans don't necessarily employ as consistently. But with this, I want to briefly bring up some considerations. So first, the work I'm presenting is descriptive. We just found that a template exists, but we don't have data on which tactics are more or less effective just yet. And I also don't endorse this template as some sort of empathy gold standard. But I do think it introduces some interesting follow-up questions regarding if some preferred way to express empathy even exists, especially when you factor in cultural differences. So templates can also come with negative connotation, and I'd like to posit that the use of templates isn't inherently bad. Depending on the circumstance, a template of what to say is a great choice. 911 callers use a template, and LLMs had to learn this template from somewhere, so likely from chatbot users. And then this project is limited to single turn interactions. All of this work was just one stimuli post from a support seeker and then one response from an LLM or a human. But a collaborator actually recently released a preprint showing that these templates do actually persist in a multi-turn setting. So that's also very interesting. But I just want to say that I'm not saying that LLMs are all the same regardless of context. And I'll loop back to the very beginning. They do respond coherently. So they do refer back to what you're saying, like the paraphrasing. It's just that they more use this predictable set of empathic strategies when responding. So I just want to thank all my wonderful collaborators, my advisor, Desmond Ong. This project would not be what it is without them. So feel free to scan the QR code if you're interested in reading our preprint on this work. Thank you.
Time for one question.
Hi, thank you very much for your research. I think it's actually really inspiring. So I have a mischievous idea here, because you mentioned that, may we go back to the first very few pages, because I remembered you mentioned somewhere that like human beings prefer like LLM generated like empathy chats, something like that, right? So can we, so I'm not from the psychology department, so I don't know whether someone has done this kind of research before, but if I'm going to do this, I am going to reversely engineer the Turing test. I'm going to use the framework of Turing test. This time, like the human beings will be seated there, and on the screen they will be shown. So they will never know whether a specific paragraph is generated by human beings to express empathy, or actually it is generated by ChatGPT or Claude Code or whatever, right? And I would like to see like whether human beings can correctly identify which is generated by chatbots, which is generated by real human beings. Yeah, I don't know whether someone has done this before, but I feel like this can be very interesting. Yeah, that's just my thought. Yeah.
That's a great point. I'm pretty sure there has been work done on this, and people are pretty bad at distinguishing between LLM generated and human written text. But there are some key phrases that LLMs use that are more easily identifiable, especially going forward. There's really interesting things like LLMs will prefer to use longer words over shorter words. So they'll use the word like mathematics instead of math in their responses. And that's one way that you could potentially tell that it's written by an LLM. But unless you're trained in this or you look at these types of texts every day, it's actually fairly difficult to tell them apart. But there is, that research of the AI empathy penalty. So if somebody knows that it's been written by AI, this was mentioned earlier, that, people are going to find it less empathic just because it's been written by AI. Even if it was anonymous and they didn't know, they would prefer it.
Okay. Take one more question.
Thank you. It's really very interesting topic. And I had I'm working on something. Did you check about that your prompt to whatever the chat GPT has given the answers to be matched with the another LLM models to be they say that as an emotional empathy, just say that, oh, I'm the broken today, whatever the chat GPT answer is giving, and you have to make the comparison, right? There is something different. But did you tell that another model that LLM has given me this answer? So they have, did you check that this is the other LLM models empathy answer has changed or not changed?
Oh, we haven't checked out, but that's a great point, and that's something that we could look at in the future.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.